Now on deck for JFtC, I am the Fekless Wonder, Steve Fek, ready to share the views from the On Fek Circle, streaming to Blue Jays fans everywhere, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time on the JFtC YouTube channel. Join the conversations by commenting in the chat areas and on our Facebook page. You can also send your points of view and show topics to Fekless Wonder at JFtC.com. Joining us on our YouTube channel is Sunny Side of the Dome, hosted by JFtC writer and analyst Karen Suter, live Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Karen shows us how to enjoy being a Jays fan while still discussing how the Jays can get even better. 303 episodes strong, the premier Blue Jays podcast, the JFtC radio podcast, records and streams live Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on your YouTube channel, the JFtC Facebook page, and on Twitter at Jays from Couch. Senior editor and JFtC founder Shaun Doyle creates and moderates Blue Jays Talk for All, the Blue Jays players, beat writers, out-of-town analysts, and fellow couchers. Never miss our fake Blue Jays news segments. Download any episode free on demand at Apple, Google, Podbean, Stitcher, anywhere you find your favorite podcast. All of these fine programs are brought to you by your source for quality Blue Jays coverage, JaysFromTheCouch.com. Welcome to another edition of On Fek Circle, live from Pittsburgh, PA. Yes, there are Blue Jay fans in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm not the only one. It's a big university town, so you occasionally walk down the street, catch a person with a Blue Jay shirt or a cap on or whatever. I've even been stopped on the street with my Blue Jays gear on. And when I said hello, they must have recognized my voice. They even said, "Hey, are you the Fekless Wonder?" So you see, Blue Jays Nation extends beyond the 49th parallel and all the border cities and states. Blue Jays are catching on everywhere. I probably get asked more about the Blue Jays by friends that do podcasts for the Pirates here locally or other cities than I do about their own teams. So it's an exciting season. It's been a rough season. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go on, through the program. We have a bedtime story about Jimy Williams that has a 2022 moral of the story, if you will, but that'll be at the end of the program. I'm going to talk about a proposal for realignment as the shadow GM of the Toronto Blue Jays. It's important that I not only take a critical look or make suggestions about rosters, but take a look at the whole baseball landscape for the Toronto Blue Jays and suggest things that perhaps would better the state of Blue Jays fandom. And I think you'll like my proposed realignment idea. I even think that the union would get behind it. So we'll get that after we throw out some ceremonial first pitches. For those of you that have not heard, Danny Jansen has been activated from the IL. He's probably going to be in the lineup tonight. I haven't seen the official lineups for today's game. Gabriel Moreno is back down in Buffalo, and it's a good thing. Okay, it's not that Gabriel Moreno has played his way off the roster. More regular reps behind the plate as well as at the plate is only going to help him become a productive member of this team down the stretch in September. So, or even sooner, depending on how circumstances are, if they would decide to trade Danny Jansen, let's say, at the trading deadline. His name has come up a couple different places that sort of surprised me. One of them being, I was listening to the Miami Marlins broadcast last night, and they talked about Danny Jansen being a trade target. Now, of course, the conversation started with Alejandro Kirk, and now that he's a starting position player for the All-Stars coming up next week, I think most teams understand that unless they're really going to pay through the nose, they don't have a shot. They had their chance to try to get Alejandro Kirk, and they hemmed and hawed and didn't want to pay the price. They're not going to get him, certainly not during the season, time soon probably. But Jansen's name came up. Jacob Stallings has not been hitting for them. That would give them the two best defensive catchers in the game to handle that Marlins pitch. And that little bit of pop that Danny could provide would be more gap power in that ballpark in Miami. But his name came up during that broadcast. I've heard his name mentioned going to Oakland. Oakland's been trying to get their catcher, so perhaps they would need to pick up a catcher. So that might mean, Frankie Montas could be available to come to Toronto. Yeah, I'm just thinking it's all rumors and theories at this point. There's no proof to it, but these are just, I like to report things that I have heard, especially when they're out of the market, because that shows what other cities and the information that's kind of being fed to these announcing crews, because they don't do a lot of investigative journalism as far as play-by-play broadcasters, having been one in the past and having been part of crews and radio stations that broadcast games. These guys, okay, they're not going to be winning Pulitzer Prizes anytime soon. Okay, this information gets fed to them for a reason. So I just found that very interesting. But Danny Jansen is there. He's back with the Blue Jays, and he picked up where he left off first time he was on the IL. So hopefully that same thing can happen. We were talking about the Jays from the Couch radio podcast in the intro. Coming up this week, Christian Rao of Slasher Sports and his own podcast, The Rao Report. He's going to be a guest on this coming Monday's Jays from the Couch radio podcast. He's a big Orioles fan, and the Baltimore Orioles are making believers out of even the most cynical. I mean, it might not be as much fun for us now. We can't poke as much ready, easy fun at the Orioles, but they put together a nice little run, and they should remind Blue Jay fans of where we came from. Oh, and Shaun Doyle just put up something on the screen there for me. That we're going to talk about Major League Baseball in general at the halfway point. So it won't be just Orioles talk that we'll be talking about. Though, of course, if you're out there and you want to try your best Orioles put down or joke that we can put up on the screen while Christian's joining us, I'm not saying you should do that, but I don't know that I would discourage you from doing that. So the Christian will be on the podcast next week. I want to send out kudos to the Blue Jays fan base in general for the way that they put fannies in the seats out there at T-Mobile Park over this past weekend series in Seattle. I mean, the Mariners they draw okay. I mean, they're not selling out every night, but I mean, they draw pretty well. But Blue Jays fans came out, en masse. And I'm sure there's a lot of Blue Jays fans throughout the Pacific Northwest. You obviously have the tie-in with the High A team out in Vancouver being an affiliate. But I mean, British Columbia, Vancouver, Victoria Trail, they've always been a big Blue Jay draw for people. But, listening to the broadcast, following people on social media, you got people there from Alberta. You had people there from Saskatchewan. The two that really jumped out at me is that there were Blue Jay fans that came down from Northwest Territory and also from Manitoba. I mean, that's a trip. I mean, flying to Seattle from a major metropolitan area is not easy. So if you're doing that drive, that's a day and a half drive from some of these locations. And if you flew in, you probably have to go through all kinds of customs and other kind of bells and whistles. So, kudos to you, Blue Jay fans. It was nice to experience. I mean, I wish the Jays would have performed better for you, but it didn't seem to discourage them. I mean, I'm sure they were disappointed in what the results were this weekend, but it was a very fine showing by Blue Jays Nation out there in Seattle. So kudos for that. I want to take a look at the AL wild standings real quick as my final first pitch. The Jays do hold the final wild card spot. They're tied with the Mariners in theory, but actually they are the fourth. They would hold the final wild card spot. That fourth spot, the two best teams in each league will get a first round bye. So right now that's the Yankees and Astros. But the Mariners have a better run differential than the Blue Jays do. significantly so. You've got the Red Sox have a 2-game cushion over everybody else. The Rays are right there. They're a game and a half back. Every team is going to have a flaw. And I know Blue Jays Nation is saying, oh, yeah, but, the Red Sox, they only feast on teams with under 500 records. They're not really for real. Well, the bottom line is they hold the top wildcard spot. And how did the Jays do against the A's? How did the Jays do against the Orioles? How did the Jays do against a lot of teams? Matt Sweeby joining in. Hi, Fek. First-time caller, long-time listener. Can all the AL East teams finish over 500? I'll hang up and listen to your answer. Well, I appreciate you first, Matt, for not hanging up before I even got to talk. That's generally what happens in my personal life as well as here on Jason the Couch on the On Fek Circle. I don't see all of the teams finishing above 500. Is it possible? Yes, it is. I think it would require all of the other teams in the AL really stumbling. I mean, I haven't taken a look at the Orioles schedule down the stretch, but I would imagine that they're done playing most of the sub 500 teams in the AL. I could be wrong about that. But I think they've had their run. I think they're going to finish 72, 74, 75 wins. I think that's the question. I just don't see all 5 of the teams finishing at 500. That would be pretty amazing if you think having your whole division be above 500. I want to say that's happened once in the divisional era, but it was a while ago, and I'm not even sure that's the case. But as always, Matt, great from you, as always, and I do thank you for your question. If you would like to ask me a question, have a comment, call me a dope, type in chat area if you're watching live on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, on Twitter, type it in, and see if you're able to try to get up on the screen. And assuming that my feeble eyesight does not fail me, I'll be able to read the question and answer it to the best of my ability. Back to the ball crisis real quick. The Rays, people say, well, again, they have a much better run differential than the Blue Jays do. And the Blue Jays have this vaunted offense. And people will say, well, the Blue Jays have had a lot of injuries. The Rays right now, including guys that have come back, have 16 guys on the IL. Many of them on the long-term 60-day IL. And they're eventually going to have to find room for them or expose them to waivers if they're going to try to, DFA them or try to outright them. So, there's nobody on Tampa, boo-hooing about the Blue Jays injuries that they've had. The Rays have been, especially their pitching staff, which is what gets the Rays deep into the playoffs. They've had just devastating injuries to pitchers. Shane Baz just came back. Tyler Glasnow's still not back. Peter Fairbanks. I always forget. I forget the Patino, the starter. A bunch of bullpen guys are all on the 60-day. So you can't use that as an excuse. Injuries aren't an excuse. And the Mariners just showed you what they're about. A lot of people will say, "Oh, but they're too young. You're depending on too many young players." Well, that's what the Blue Jays did in 2020. But that's why you make aggressive trades. That's why you go out on the trade market. That's what the Rays and Mariners are famous for, and they're going to do it. The Mariners have already made multiple trades. I believe the Rays have made one. They're going to be active before. They're not going to wait till August the 2nd, the trade deadline, to get better and improve their standing. So all these excuses the Blue Jay fans are trying to use to convince themselves, I guess, so that they don't panic or get worried. I don't know that they carry a lot of water. The Blue Jays have dug this hole similar to what they did last year. Okay. And again, this year, the front office is choosing to follow the process and convince themselves that they have the depth to turn things around and make a run and secure that playoff run. But remember, the trade deadline is August the 2nd. These wildcard standings aren't going to be finalized till the last week of September, first couple of days of October. Comes first, the trading line. And the Blue Jays aren't the only team with expanded playoff fields and the general improvement of teams. I mean, technically, the Orioles are there in the wild card race, as are the Guardians. They can't just sit back and say, "Oh, okay, we'll figure out all of these things are happening." And don't worry about it. You know, Blue Jays have to get aggressive, and two of the teams that are in direct competition with have already been aggressive, and they are always aggressive. And the Red Sox, now that they got Sale back, they got Garrett Whitlock coming back this week. They've got payroll flexibility. They're going to be aggressive on the market. So the Jays can't just sit back. Otherwise, it's going to be like last year, where they're going to make a valiant run, be in the mix there, but they don't get it done. I don't think we're at that point yet, but it's getting there. Okay, so now as the shadow GM, self-appointed, yes, but nobody else appointed themselves that, of the Blue Jays. I've been trying to do a mixture of roster things I need to do, making comments like having to be aggressive on the trade things, but I've also came up with ideas like the Jays need to spearhead the move to have Tampa Bay relocate to Montreal. They need to be the voice. They need that second Canadian franchise so they can advance their interests, okay, and also benefit from the PR windfall by being behind the effort, supporting. Rogers could even underwrite the building of a downtown stadium in Montreal. Whatever it would take, I think the Blue Jays need to do that. But I want to talk about something that would shake up Major League landscape, have a lot of positive impact for teams in general and the game in general, but in particular would have huge benefits for the Blue Jays. And that would be a radical realignment of the divisions and the leagues even, because now that they have this balanced schedule coming in next year and everybody plays every team, and you're not really depending on the old having extra games than the unbalanced schedule playing your divisional rivals, quote unquote. They want it to be a more universal game. So you know what, Blue Jays, maybe you can carry this to Rob Manfred. He likes to write memos. Write him a memo. He loves memos. And say, I think this could really help us. The Players Association during the CBA negotiations proposed a pretty, not as radical as this, but they proposed a radical realignment of the leagues and the divisions. They were pretty much keeping teams within the same league format, but they wanted to go from 3 divisions to 2 and just have their playoff format, top 2 teams from each division making the playoffs in the 2 leagues. So it would have been 8 playoff teams and not what we have here now with the 12. I am saying, since we've basically gotten rid of the 2 main differences, one is expanded interleague play and playing every team in each league an equal number of times, and making a universal DH. There's no longer the National League game and the American League game. Let's realign geographically. And in some cases, the realignment is sort of, because of the geographic economic factors, you're having big market teams all having to battle it out. So you're not having small market struggles like Baltimore and Tampa Bay in the AL East. You can argue that Toronto is not a big market team because of the economic shortfalls that come having to pay expenses in US dollars, but generating revenues in Canadian dollars. But if you're breaking up geographically, you can't really keep the teams in the leagues that they have traditionally been in. So In the American League, it is going to be predominantly an Eastern time zone with some Central time zone teams leagues. So now you're going to have an East Coast versus West Coast league matchup. The National League would be primarily the Midwest, the Mountain West, and the Pacific time zone. The American League would be the Northeast, the Great Lakes, and the Southern cities. So in the American League, in the Atlantic Division, or the Eastern Division, if you want to call it that, it would be the Boston Red Sox, the New York Mets, New York Yankees, Philadelphia Phillies, Baltimore Orioles. The I-95 teams. Now, you could say, well, what about the Washington Nationals? If there's expansion, there could be, a 6-team added in there, or you could move the Nationals from the Southern Division, which I'll talk about in a second. But in essence, you've got all of those teams that are right there. Easy travel. You could technically take a train. You could actually go back to the old days and take a train to each one of these cities. In the Southern Division, we have the Washington Nationals because really their market is Virginia and the northern sections of North Carolina. That is their TV market. So it makes sense, since a big part of your market is predominantly in southern states. You go in the Southern Division and you go in there with the Braves, the Cincinnati Reds. And before you say, well, Cincinnati's in Ohio and that's the north, Cincinnati is directly across the river from Kentucky. The airport for Cincinnati is in Kentucky. The players stay in Kentucky and then come through the tunnels to go play at the Great American Ballpark. They could play in the Southern Division. They have the traditional rivalry in the old NL West with the Braves. They fit in well. Then you also have the Marlins, the Rays, and the Nationals in that division. If the Rays would move to Nashville, let's say, rather than move to Montreal, as I proposed, perfect fit in the Southern Division. Now, the one that affects and I think benefits the Blue Jays on so many levels would be a Great Lakes division. And in there, you would have the Cleveland Indians, the Detroit Tigers, their traditional long-standing rivalry before MLB got all cute and with the 3 divisions and everything else going on. The Milwaukee Brewers, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Blue Jays. Now, you would say, well, Pittsburgh's not on the Great Lakes. No, but, the 3 rivers and the canal system connects commerce up to the Great Lakes. It's not that far from Cleveland, Pittsburgh. It's the great, rivalry, sort of like how we make fun of the Orioles. That's what Pittsburgh and Cleveland are always back and forth. People from Pittsburgh travel to Toronto on a regular basis because it's a very big cultural center here in Pittsburgh, believe it or not. Has a world-class symphony, a lot of things going for it. People will go to Toronto to see shows rather than having to wait another year for the traveling company to come to Pittsburgh. You also have the draw of Niagara Falls. So you have, Cleveland, an easy drive up to Toronto for fans, down to Pittsburgh. The Tigers, to renew that rivalry would be truly special because you still have in Western Ontario a lot of folks that are Tiger fans. They grew up Tiger fans, so they pass it on to their family, and they may even get Detroit, television broadcasts as readily as they get, Sportsnet or CTV or CBC, so I think it would be great to have that as a division. Toronto would then be in kindred cities. They're not having, despite it being one of the most powerful economic centers in North America or in any of the Americas, it's really not a big market. When you look at New York and Boston and Philly and LA, so you would have them in that division. In the National League, we'd have a Midwest division where you'd have the Cubs and the White Sox. You have the Cardinals because the Cardinals have that traditional rivalry with the Cardinals. And geographically, as far as radio and TV, White Sox and Cardinals have a blend of a market. So that would be great. You'd have the cross-state rivals for St. Louis and Kansas City. You'd have the Minnesota Twins. The Twins have developed a nice rivalry in the 21st century with the Chicago White Sox. So I think that would be, again, a nice geographic fit. You'd have the Western Division is a little more widespread, but it can't be perfect. So you would have Arizona and Colorado. You would have Houston and Seattle, and you'd have the Texas Rangers. So you really have three time zones, which kind of benefits the lifestyle and how things work out in the Western Plains and out in Arizona and Seattle. I mean, they're used to having to watch games at different times, and you're not having as many games now against Eastern zones within your league. And then the Pacific would basically be all the California teams. And if the A's stadium deal falls through, they would then move on to Las Vegas, and that fits in perfectly too. It's not a long drive to San Diego or to LA or even to the Bay Area from Las Vegas. So that's what I'm suggesting the Blue Jays need to do. It advances them on a lot of levels, and I think it helps them be more competitive when you're teamed with cities that have a similar culture, a similar zen to them, and you're not trying to be New York or Boston or Philly. The bedtime story is a pretty short one because it's kind of a tragic figure in Blue Jays history, and it's about Jimy Williams. He was the third base coach in Toronto under Bobby Cox for 6 years, actually even before Cox got here. He had an outstanding reputation as an instructor and as a teaching kind of a coach. So as long as he was just coaching, he could be very useful. He was a terrific third base coach. He wasn't afraid to be daring when the situation called for it, but he was also astute enough and smart enough to know when to pick his battles and when to send a guy, when to hold it up, depending on who was back in the lineup. He didn't pay attention to that as much when he was the manager of the Blue Jays. In fact, he didn't pay attention to a lot of things. And he was his own worst enemy. The collapse of 1987 is probably the worst collapse in the history of baseball. Yeah, I know you had, the New York Giants catching the Brooklyn Dodgers after being back almost 20 games, on July 4th, and then running them down and beating them in the playoff. You had the Phillies, who had what seemed to be an insurmountable lead, and then Gene Mauch decided that he was only going to pitch 2 pitchers for the last 10 games of the season as far as starting. Might have been a third starter mixed in, but that was basically the concept. But the Blue Jays went into the final week of the season up 3.5 games. They were playing a struggling Brewers team, and then they were playing the Tigers again on the road. So you would think by accident the Blue Jays could have stumbled into winning the AL East in 1987. They lost the game that Sunday before the big collapse that really kind of started the collapse. Within that game, you had Tom Henke, who was Mr. Reliable. Gave up a game-tying home run to Kirk Gibson in the 8th. He then pitched the scoreless 9th and the 10th inning. But despite having 34 saves and 42 attempts, he was never used again the rest of the year. On the Friday night game, after getting swept by the Brewers, Mike Flanagan went 11 innings, 135 pitches. He begged to stay in. He was in a groove. He was Mike Flanagan. He struggled a little bit, but they weren't scoring runs. Jimy Williams basically lied to his face and said, no, we're going to bring Henke in. You've done a great job. You pitched 11 innings. Flanagan said, well, I can argue with that. Tom Henke. He hasn't pitched all week. He's rested. That's great. Except he didn't bring Tom Henke in. He brought in Jeff Musselman, a rookie, who then immediately had the bases loaded, got the bases loaded. They brought in Mike Eichhorn, I'm sorry, Mark Eichhorn, not Mike. It was Mike Eichhorn. Induced a ground ball as he was prone to do. Ball went under Manny Lee's glove. Run scored. They lost that game. Jimmy Key was terrific in that series. Jim Clancy, 7 innings, 79 pitches. He pulled him for no reason and still didn't use his ace reliever at all during that whole series. Those are the kind of decisions that he made all the time. And for no apparent reason. That sound familiar, folks? He got himself fired in May of 1989. We all know the story. Cito Gaston replaced him, took the team to the AL East title. Charlie Montoyo is our modern day Jimy Williams. It's time for Charlie to go. Great teacher. In-game decisions, that's just not his thing. So yes, here on A Bedtime Story, the moral of the story is Blue Jays fans need to learn from history. They should see Charlie Montoyo release, keep him within the organization. Good organization, man. And we need to find a veteran manager who can manage in-game decisions. We're out of time here for this week's On Fek Circle. Make sure that you join us this coming Monday. Christian Rao, the Rao Report on the Jason McCouch radio podcast. Karen is off this week. No Sunny Side of the Dome. She'll be back next week. We're at the normal time, Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. I am the madman across the border, Steve Fek. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.